Hey everyone, welcome back to Stronger Minds, Stronger Men, the podcast where we dive deep into the untold stories and mental landscapes of men today. I'm your host, Austin, and I'm really glad you're here. Whether you've been rocking with us from the beginning or you're just tuning in for the first time, welcome to a space where we keep it real, raw, and honest. Today's episode is one that hits close to home, not just for me personally, but for so many men out there who are silently fighting battles behind closed doors. We're talking about why men are less likely to seek therapy. Why is it so hard to say, I need help? Why do we hesitate to opening up when things get heavy? And more importantly, why does asking for support feel like weakness when in reality it takes incredible strength? We're going to dig into this from multiple angles. We'll talk about how culture and stigma shapes our idea of masculinity, how history and biology play into emotional suppression, and how a lot of this stuff is passed down from father to son, generation to generation. And if you're a dad, a brother, a friend, or even just someone trying to understand yourself better, this episode is for you. We'll also explore what healing can actually look like, because the truth is, we can break this cycle. We can redefine strength. We can make a normal human for men to talk, to feel, and to seek help when they need it. So whether you've been to therapy, thought about it, or never even considered it, I hope this conversation gives you something to think about, and maybe even the permission you didn't know you needed. So let's get into it. Let's start with the facts, because the numbers don't lie, and they paint a pretty stark picture of what we're dealing with when it comes to men and mental health. Roughly 40% of men who experience mental health challenges ever seek help. Compare that to about 60% of women, and you start to see that there's a gap that speaks to something deeper than just access or awareness. It speaks to culture, to messaging, to how boys are raised, and what men are taught to believe about emotions and vulnerability. And here's the heavier part. Men are about 3 to 4 times more likely to die by suicide than women. That stat alone should shake us awake. It's not just a quiet problem or a private struggle, it's a crisis. One that often goes unseen, unnoticed, until it's too late. Now, some people might hear those numbers and assume men aren't just dealing with it as much emotionally, that maybe they're more resilient or less affected. But the truth is, it's not that men don't suffer. They do, deeply, and in many cases, differently. Men often suffer in isolation. We've been trained to muscle through it, bury it, distract ourselves, or numb it out. That's why we're less likely to be diagnosed with depression or anxiety, not because it's not there, but because it doesn't always show up the way it does in women, or in the way that the system is trained to recognize. A lot of men don't internalize their pain as openly. Instead, they externalize it. They might look like angry, irritably, snapping at other people without knowing why. Might show up as substance abuse, drinking more, using drugs to cope, to shut it off, to feel something, or to feel nothing at all. Sometimes it's emotional withdrawal, pulling back from loved ones, shutting down, disappearing into work or hobbies, avoiding conversations, ghosting people who truly care. And here's the thing. We don't always recognize those behaviors as symptoms of depression or emotional distress. Society often sees an angry man as just that, angry, or a man who drinks too much as just someone who likely likes to party. But underneath, there's usually a whole world of pain, confusion, fear, or shame that hasn't been given space to breathe. This is why it's important to talk about how we express emotional pain, Because if we're only looking for sadness and tears, we're going to miss a whole lot of men who are hurting in silence. And silence is dangerous. Silence isolates, silence builds pressure until eventually something gives, something in the form of a breakdown, sometimes through violence, and tragically, far too often, through suicide. So, what do we do to deal with all of this? That's the big question. And it's the one we're going to keep unpacking today. But the first step is just recognizing that men do suffer, that help seeking isn't a character flaw, that feeling pain doesn't make you less of a man, it just makes you human. Because if we can shift that narrative, we can shift the outcomes. Let's take a step back now and talk about where this all starts. Because if we really want to understand why so many struggle in silence, we've got to go back to childhood, the messages we absorb before we even know what mental health is. From a young age, we're told, not always directly, but definitely consistently, to try to not cry, to not show weakness, to man up, toughen up, stop acting like a girl. Think about that. Those messages don't just come from movies or media. They come from parents, teachers, coaches, even other kids on the playground. Sometimes even in loving homes, boys are told to be strong for everyone. And that strength gets defined very narrowly. Physically tough emotional control, silence in the face of pain. By the time we hit adolescence or adulthood, those ideas have solidified into something bigger. What we are really talking about here is the difference between toxic masculinity and healthy masculinity. Now, let me be clear, masculinity in itself isn't the problem. There's nothing wrong with being masculine. There's are beautiful things about masculinity like courage, leadership, responsibility, loyalty. But when masculinity becomes rigid, when it says you can only be this way, you're not a real man, that's where we run into trouble. That's where it turns toxic. Toxic masculinity tells men don't show emotion unless it's anger. Don't ask for help. It means you're weak. Don't be vulnerable. It means you've lost control. And definitely don't go to therapy because therapy is for people who are broken. Let's sit with that last one for a second because that belief runs deep. A lot of men carry the idea that going to therapy is admitting defeat, that if you need help, you've already failed somehow at being a man, at being strong, at handling your own problems. But think about it. Isn't it more courageous to face what's going on inside than to run from it? Isn't it more honorable to want to grow, to show up better for your family, your partner, your kids, your friends? That brings us to another huge piece of this, the provider and protector roles. These are roles that have been traditionally assigned to men, and in a lot of ways, they're still celebrated today. And again, there's nothing wrong with wanting to take care of your family or protecting the people you love. But the problem is, we often wrap our entire identity in those roles. And when we feel like we're not meeting those expectations, maybe we're struggling financially, emotionally, mentally, it creates shame. It makes us feel like we're failing, not just at life, but at being a man. And here's the real kicker. When you are stuck in that mindset, you don't feel like you're allowed to struggle. You don't feel like you have permission to say, hey, I'm not okay right now. Because you're the one who's supposed to have it together. You're the rock. You're the protector. So instead of reaching out, you shut down. You isolate. You push through. And you pay the price internally. What we have to understand is that these pressures, this conditioning, it doesn't make men stronger, it makes men silent. It makes them suffer in ways they can't talk about. It leads to disconnection, burnout, substance abuse, emotional distance, broken relationships, and sometimes it ends in tragedy. But here's the hope: this doesn't have to be the way forward. We have the power to redefine what masculinity can look like. We can hold on to the strength, the resilience, the leadership, but also make room for emotional intelligence, vulnerability, self awareness, and compassion. That is strength too. Healthy masculinity, you can be strong and sensitive. You can lead and ask for support. You can protect others and care for yourself. You can feel things deeply and still be powerful. And we've got to start normalizing that. We've got to start showing young boys that it's okay to cry, to talk, to feel. That therapy isn't a punishment or a last resort. It's a tool, a powerful one. It's a way to understand yourself better, to heal old wounds, and to show up in life as your full self, not just the version you think you're supposed to be. So, if you're listening to this and you've been on the fence about therapy, or even just opening up to a friend, know this: you're not alone. There is nothing wrong with you for feeling what you feel. And asking for help doesn't make you weak, it makes you brave. It makes you, and it means you are ready to grow. And honestly, that's the kind of man the world needs more of. For years, I told myself I didn't need therapy. I thought I could handle it. I thought I should be able to handle it because that's what was taught, right? You push through, you don't complain, you keep it moving. I wore my trauma like an armor, and I don't say that to sound poetic. I mean it literally. I took every hard thing I've been handed and been through, and it turned it into a reason to be tougher, colder, more controlled, less open. I told myself if I just stay focused, if I just keep grinding, if I just keep my head down, I'll be fine. But what I didn't realize was that armor can't tell the difference between protection and isolation. I was keeping the pain out, but I was also keeping everything else out: love, joy, connection, and peace. And slowly that armor started to crack, not from the outside pressures, but from the weight I was carrying on the inside. That unprocessed grief, the anger I didn't know how to express, the moments I should have cried but didn't, the nights I felt completely alone and told no one. It didn't hit all at once, it chipped away at me quietly, subtly, until I found myself short tempered with people I loved, distance from those trying to reach me, exhausted even when nothing was wrong. And the scariest part, I didn't even know why. I just felt off, heavy, numb. That's when I finally admitted to myself something had to change. Not because I was broken, but because I was human. And I was tired of pretending not to be. Therapy didn't fix me because I wasn't broken to begin with. What it did was give me a mirror, a space to understand what I'd been carrying, a chance to take off the armor piece by piece and figure out who I was underneath. And that's what I want for every man listening: not to be fixed, but to feel free. Free to feel, free to speak, free to heal, free to live without the weight of having to prove your strength every single day. Because real strength is knowing when it's time to take the armor off. So let's talk about something that doesn't get brought up enough when we tell men just go to therapy. It's not always that easy. First off, there's a real lack of male therapists. And that matters because a lot of men want to talk to someone who gets it, someone who understands what it feels like to carry that pressure, to stay silent for years, to walk through life with a straight face and a storm inside. It's not the women can't be great therapists. They absolutely can. But for many men, especially those just starting to open up, talking to somebody who's walked a similar road makes all the difference. And when that connection is missing, it's hard to feel safe, hard to trust. Because here's the truth, for some men, the hardest part isn't talking, it's trusting someone enough to be seen. Thinking about it. If you grew up in a household or a culture where emotions were never talked about, never shown, how do you suddenly just open up to a stranger in a 50-minute session? Hey, tell me about your trauma. Most men aren't built like that. Not because they don't feel, but because they were never taught how to feel out loud. And that fear of being misunderstood, judged, or labeled, that's real. It shuts a lot of guys down before they even had a chance to start. Now, add another layer, which is cultural, race, identity. If you're a man of color, therapy might feel even further out of reach. Maybe it was never talked about in your home. Maybe there's a stigma in your community that says we don't do therapy. Maybe your family taught you to pray through it, push through it, or just bury it. And even when you do seek help, it's tough. When the person sitting across from you doesn't understand your background, your pain, your culture, therapy can feel like an emotional code switching. Like you have to educate your therapist before you can even talk about what's hurting you. That's exhausting. That's a barrier. We need more therapists who are culturally aware, trauma informed, emotionally fluent, and not just book smart. We need people who listen before they label. And then there's the practical stuff: time, money, and access. Let's be real. Therapy isn't cheap. It can be hard to find someone in network, someone you connect with, and then fit it into a schedule already packed with work, family, responsibilities. And a lot of men think, I can't afford that, or I can't take time away from everything else. But here's the truth: if you don't make time for your mental health, your body, your relationships, your peace, you'll pay for it anyway, in stress, in burnout, in broken relationships, in your health. Now, I want you to picture this. You've never been taught how to talk about feelings. You've never even been asked how you're doing in a real way. Then suddenly you're expected to walk into a room, sit down with a stranger, and pour your soul out in under an hour. Of course it feels awkward. Of course it feels unnatural. That doesn't mean therapy is not for you. It means this is new. And like anything new, it takes time. It takes finding the right person. It takes practice. But when you do find someone who listens, really listens, it can be life-changing. Therapy isn't about being broken. It's not a punishment. It's not weakness. It's a tool, a mirror, a safe space where you can finally start to unpack the weight you've been carrying for way too long. So if you're listening and you're ever thought therapy is not for me, I just want to challenge that a little. Maybe it's not about talking. Maybe it's about healing. Maybe it's about reclaiming your story. Maybe it's about learning how to feel again, not just survive. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to be willing to start. Even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's imperfect, even if it's just one step. Let's talk about what happens when we don't deal with our pain. When we don't talk about it, when we don't name it, when we don't feel safe enough to express it, it doesn't just go away. It doesn't just disappear into the background like some annoying thought we can ignore. It morphs, it transforms into something else. And more often than not, it shows up in ways that hurt us and the people we care about the most. Suppressed pain doesn't stay quiet. It becomes anger. the kind that boils over at the smallest thing. It becomes addiction, reaching for a bottle or a pill or scrolling endlessly just to get some relief. It becomes isolation, pulling away from everyone because connection feels too risky. And sometimes, tragically, it becomes violence against others or against ourselves. You've probably seen this, or maybe even lived it. The guy who loses his temper out of nowhere, not because of what just happened, but because of what's been building for years. The man who works 60 hours a week, not because he loves the job, but because it's easier than facing what's waiting for him at home. The dad who can't seem to connect with his kids, not because he doesn't care, but because he's so emotionally numb, he doesn't know how. And let's talk about the numbness. Emotionally shutting down, especially in relationships. That's one of the biggest costs of unprocessed pain. I've heard men say they feel like they're watching life happen from behind glass, like they're in the room, but not in it. Like they're saying the right things, doing the right things, but something inside has just gone dark. And that shows up in our relationships in a big way. When a man is emotionally shut down, his partner feels it, the kids feel it. There's a distance that builds up, a wall that gets higher and thicker. And what's wild is most of the time, he doesn't even know how it got there. He just knows something's off. And instead of talking about it, he pulls away even more. Because for a lot of men, emotions feel unsafe, not just because they're uncomfortable, but because we were never given the tools to process them. We were told to suppress, ignore, distract, move on. So we did. But over time, that catches up. And the longer we carry unspoken grief, unacknowledged trauma, unprocessed pain, the heavier it gets. And eventually something breaks. Maybe it's a marriage. Maybe it's a relationship with a child. Maybe it's your mental health, your body, your peace. I have heard men feel like a ghost in their own home, alive but not living. They're there but not present. Their wife thinks they don't care. Their kids don't go to them, but it's not that they don't love them. They just feel so far away from themselves that they don't know how to show up for their families anymore. Man, that hit me hard. That's what unprocessed pain does. It doesn't just stay tucked away, it disconnects us from our partners, our children, our sense of purpose, our own identity. We stop laughing at like we used to. We stop dreaming. We stop talking and taking care of ourselves. We just start existing. And I think what's even more heartbreaking is so many men think this is normal. They think this is just what life is, that this is what adulthood or manhood or is supposed to feel like. Quiet suffering, emotional disconnection, white knuckling your way through the week. But I want to say this to anyone who feels like that right now, that's not living. That's surviving. And you deserve more than that. Your relationships deserve more than that. Your kids, your partner, your future, they all deserve the fully alive version of you. The one who feels, who speaks, who heals. Because it's not too late and you're not too far gone. There's a path back to yourself, and it starts with honesty. It starts with naming the pain instead of hiding it. It starts with reaching out even if your voice shakes. It starts with allowing yourself to feel again even if it feels terrifying. Pain that's buried doesn't stay buried. It grows roots. But pain that is faced, that shared, can begin to release. And that release, that's where the healing begins. That's where connection comes back. That's where presence returns. So if you're feeling like a ghost in your own life, maybe this is your invitation to come back to home, to yourself, one honest moment at a time. So we've talked about the silence, the weight of the unprocessed pain, the emotional shutdown that so many men go through. But now let's shift gears because here's the truth that doesn't get said enough. Healing isn't, or actually, healing is possible. Help is available, and asking for it is not weakness, it is strength. We've got to start normalizing help seeking behavior, not just for crisis moments, but as healthy, everyday part of being human. Because the more we talk about therapy, support groups, and emotional wellness, like we do gym workouts or physical checkups, the more we chip away at the stigma. For far too long, therapy has been framed like a last resort, something you do when you've hit rock bottom. But therapy isn't just for when everything's falling apart. It's a space to grow, to process, to reflect, a space where you can be honest without judgment. And honestly, that's rare. That is valuable. We've got to start promoting therapy as a form of strength, not surrender, because it takes real courage to sit down and say, this is what I've been carrying. It takes guts to revisit old wounds, to untangle the knots that have been silently pulling at you for years. That's not weakness. That's warrior level work. And the more men speak openly about getting help, the more other men feel safe to do the same. That's where peer support comes in. Men's groups, community circles, brotherhood spaces. These are spaces where guys can drop the mask and say, yo, me too. And something powerful happens when you realize you're not the only one feeling what you're feeling. It creates relief. It creates permission. It creates connection. If you've never been in a room with other men who are telling the truth, like really telling the truth, it's hard to describe how freeing it is to sit in a space where no one's trying to fix you, one up you, or make you feel small. Just men being human together. And here's the thing we need more leaders, fathers, brothers, uncles, mentors to model that kind of emotional integrity because young men are watching, boys are watching. They're learning not from what we say, but from what we do. And when they see an older man, someone they look up to, owning his emotions, talk about therapy, share what's real. That's powerful. That gives them permission to do the same. This is generational work. We're not just healing ourselves, we're reshaping what masculinity looks like for the next generation. And for those who aren't ready to jump into therapy just yet, that's okay too. There are other paths to healing. You might explore coaching, which is working with someone to set goals and stay accountable while focusing on a mindset and emotional awareness. Maybe journaling, getting thoughts out of your head and onto paper. You'd be surprised what clarity that can bring. Meditation and breath work, not just trendy buzzwords, but proven ways to reconnect with your body and regulate your nervous system. Or EMDR therapy, especially powerful if you're carrying trauma or difficult past experience. It's a different kind of therapy that doesn't require you to talk the whole time, which can be helpful if verbal processing isn't your thing. Even exercise, art, and music can be forms of emotional expression when done with intention. There is no one size fits all path. The key is movement, taking one step forward and toward healing, however that looks for you. And that first step doesn't have to be big. Maybe it's reaching out to a friend. Maybe it's booking a therapy session. Maybe it's just saying out loud, I'm not okay, and that's okay. And if you're a man listening to this right now, I want you to leave with this. It's okay to be tired. It's okay to be overwhelmed. It's okay to want help. You deserve to be heard without shame. You deserve space where you can be real, where you can drop the act, where you don't have to carry everything alone. The strongest thing you can do is not pretend you're fine. It's to be honest, to take the first step towards healing for yourself, for your family, for the future version of you that still is possible. So if something in this episode stirred something in you, don't brush it off. Don't go numb again. Pause, reflect, and ask yourself, what's one thing I can do today to move towards healing? Because you don't have to be a ghost in your own life. You can come back to yourself one breath, one word, one choice at a time. As we start to wrap up today's episode, I want to take a moment to really breathe this in, to sit with everything we've talked about. We've covered a lot of ground today. We started with the stats, the hard truth that men are less likely to seek help, more likely to suffer in silence, and at greater risk for things like addiction, isolation, and suicide. Not because they're weaker, but because society has conditioned them to be emotionally silent. We talked about the early messages many of us received growing up. Man up, don't cry, be strong. We unpacked how those words, even if said with good intentions, can lead to a lifetime of emotional suppression. We talked about toxic masculinity versus healthy masculinity, how strength isn't about shutting down, but about showing up, about facing our emotions, not running from them. We explored what happens when pain goes unspoken, the anger, the disconnection, the addiction, the loneliness, and maybe most heartbreaking of all, the feeling some men have of being ghosts in their own homes, alive but not living. But we didn't stop there. We also explored the way forward. We talked about normalizing help seeking, how therapy and support aren't signs of failure, they're signs of courage. We broke the myth that asking for help makes you weak. In reality, it makes you brave. It shows that you care enough about yourself and your future to do the work. We talked about alternatives to therapy too: coaching, journaling, meditation, EMDR, support groups, men's circles. These are many ways to heal, and no shame in finding that one that fits you best. And maybe most importantly, we talked about community, the role of fathers, brothers, mentors, and peers in showing up and setting a new standard. Because when one man speaks his truth, it gives 10 other permission to do the same. And now I want to leave you with this. If you're listening to this right now and something inside you is stirred, listen to that. Don't ignore it. That's your inner voice trying to get your attention. That's the part of you that wants to heal, that wants to stop hiding. That's the want to breathe again. Because no matter how far gone you feel, no matter how long you've been numbing or running or shutting down, you're not broken. You are human. And the thing is, you felt the fear, the sadness, the shame, the pressure. They're not just yours. They're shared. They are part of a bigger story that so many men carry, but they don't have to define you. Not anymore. You get to choose how your story unfolds from here. You get to ask for help. You get to heal. You get to reconnect with yourself, with your loved ones, and with life. And maybe that starts with something simply: a conversation, a journal entry, a walk, a breath. Healing doesn't always start with fireworks. Sometimes it starts quietly, humbly, in the decision to finally stop pretending everything's fine. And here's what I want you to remember deep in your bones: you are not alone, and you don't have to carry this alone anymore. Before we go, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever struggled with the idea of therapy? What held you back? Or what helped you through? What does strength mean to you now in this chapter of your life? Drop a comment on the app that you're listening to, or if you want to share privately, shoot me an email. I read every single message, and I'd be honored to hear your story. This podcast is about real people, real stories, and building a community where men can be seen and supported. Because that's what strength and stronger minds, stronger men is all about. We're rewriting the story one voice at a time. Thanks for listening to Stronger Minds, Stronger Men. Share this with a brother, a friend, or even your dad. Let's change the narrative one conversation at a time. Until next time, take care of yourself and your mind. Speak your truth, and remember, you are worthy of peace.